Welcome in to the Off-Brand Avalanche podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about some exciting prospects. We're talking about the Euros and a couple of Americans today. Well, playing in American leagues, NCAA and USHL prospects. I'm really excited for this episode. We talked about it in the last episode. All of my favorite prospects in the Avalanche range for this draft are pretty much Europeans. So I'm really excited, but let's go ahead and get right into it. Just initial impressions, what do you guys think of kind of this field of prospects coming out of Europe for this year?
One for me, I like that a lot of them. Not really a lot of them. A few of them have played against grown men to the CHL. That really appeals when it comes to prospects. One thing I'll touch on later with certain prospects, because it's hard to compare stats against from NCAA to the CHL. You can't really compare those. What I like to look at is where they played at before and the jump they had to make to the next league that they're playing in. So a couple players like Hallway, players like that that make that big jump. Those are players that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I like that idea because players that have made that big jump before are very interesting because hey, they know how to adjust to a higher level, so maybe they can translate that and adjust again to the higher level when they get up to the NHL.
Yeah, Zach, that's a good point. Because Dylan Holloway in particular is another guy that's coming out of the AJ and made the jump to NCAA. And honestly, we're seeing a little bit more of that in recent years. Guys not taking Canadian players not taking major junior out, but smaller leagues like the BC or the AJ or leagues like that, just so they can play college hockey. And I think there is some upside to that. I do feel like the NCAA definitely has.
Okay. Let me know live chat if that fixed the echo. I think I know what the problem was. But we should be good. Go ahead, Marshall.
Okay, but I was just saying, I do think that the NCAA provides a higher level of competition than the major junior leagues. You're playing against older men, more developed guys, and I think that players coming out of college are more pro ready than players coming out of like the WHL or any of the CHL leagues, really.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
I also like that you can bring them in. One of the biggest problems the Avs have had with Bowen Byram is just what do we do with him? Because he's not really going to get much out of the WHL, and we can't seem to quite work him into the NHL, so it would be nice to have a place where CHL players we can't bring to the AHL, European players we can, and I feel like that's just another edge that they have.
NCAA players too, so that's another thing. Are scouted heavily in the CHL, and it's a fantastic route for a lot of people, but for some players that might not be so developed yet that they're ready to make the jump straight from the CHL to the NHL, I think the NCAA is a great option, and I think Europe is too. Like we saw with Austin Matthews, it was kind of an unprecedented decision that he made to go and play in Switzerland. But in the end, I do feel like it benefited him greatly. A historic first game for him, 4 goals, and he was just playing against older men and tough competition all year in Switzerland.
Yeah, to me, I've always felt like going the NCAA route or going to Europe, it helps your two-way game when you're a young player. Maybe I'm sure you guys have observed this as well. The CHL is really just like a high-scoring, high-intensity, shoot the puck kind of league. Like definitely all the good scorers play in the CHL, which is no knock on them, obviously. They just don't play the structure kind of game that you play in the NCAA or in Europe against men.
Yeah, it's just a higher level league, to be honest. Mm-hmm. So I like the idea of drafting a European, and also just this pool in particular. I love the European prospects. Let's go ahead and start with the guy that we know we're not going to get, but deep down we have that hope in the back of our minds might crater and fall to us, and that's Yaroslav Askarov. Askarov is the best goalie prospect to come along since Carey Price. He is as close to a sure thing you can get at the goalie position, and this is going to be a little bit of a bold take here, with the top 6 center depth that the Avs already have in their system, if the Colorado Avalanche were picking second overall, I would take Yaroslav Askarov.
Wow.
That's pretty fair, Billy. But at the same time, you just touched on it. It's like, yeah, Askarov is probably as much of a sure thing as you're gonna get from the goalie position. But the thing is how much of a sure thing is it from the goalie position? Because even the highest end prospects every year we see, it's like, ooh, like, yeah, there's a lot of potential there, but there's also a lot of potential for them to just flame out. I mean, we like with Spencer Knight last year. It's like, in my opinion, I do think Askarov's a better prospect than him. Yeah. But there is a very good possibility that Spencer Knight is just like a backup goaltender and just like a French NHL guy. And
I don't know. Spencer Knight's looked good so far in his first year in college.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's like the whole thing with goalies. Yeah. Goalies are weird. Goalies are very weird.
They are weird. And I want to say, though, there's like this stigma around taking goalies in the first round. I think that Askarov is as safe as any other player you're taking in the top five outside of Alexei Lafreniere. I think that he's a safer pick than Byfield. I think he's a safer pick than Stützle. I want to compare this a little bit to the NFL. And I'm a Colts fan, so my reference point is the Colts. And, going into the draft in 2018, there was a lot of this hype around Quentin Nelson. And basically people say, you don't take a guard in the top 10. You don't do that. Quentin Nelson was the exception because he is so far and away the best guard prospect that had come out forever that you were going to take him in the top 5.
Yeah.
Yaroslav Askarov is the same way. There are different reasons that you don't take a goalie in the top 10 than a guard. Guards are usually safer but less impactful, whereas a goalie is a little bit riskier. But I see it as somewhat of a similar situation where he is just so far and away the best goalie prospect that we have seen in a while that I would take him. That I think there's no question that I think he's worth a top 5 pick.
Yeah, I mean, the risk between a guard and a goaltender are totally different. I totally agree that he may be the best prospect out of goaltending to come around a long time, but just the risk factor in goaltending is way, way higher. And that's the only thing that would scare me away. Not that he's not good enough.
Yeah, and hopefully it's enough to scare away 24 NHL teams.
Yeah. That would be, I mean, then our goaltending pipeline is looking like the next Rangers, like the next Rangers pipeline. If that's the case. Yeah. So if that happens and he's there at 25, if we don't pick him, then I'm gonna sue the Colorado Avalanche. But I don't see
making me sad.
Yeah, I don't see that happening. Billy, like you said, I do think that he is a top 5 pick. I don't see him slipping by Ottawa at this point. Especially that Ottawa has 2 top 5 picks. I think that there's at least some value of just like, yeah, you're going to try to find your next like franchise goaltender, and that's what Askarov is, looking to be at this point. There are a couple things that kind of jump out to me with Askarov, just looking at his stats from the last couple of years. This last season, he did in 3 KHL games, and he absolutely tore it up. He had a .974 save percentage and then a .74 GAA. But then if you go into the VHL, he only played 2 games in the VHL and only had a .900 save percentage and a 2.52 GAA. Why do you think that is?
I mean, 2 games is not enough of a sample size for me to draw any meaningful conclusions, I feel like.
Is there a little bit of inconsistency, though?
No. I think when you change leagues, especially on goaltenders, this is why, like, even when I play with, like, men's league goaltenders or club-level goaltenders, a lot of them have a problem switching between levels of leagues because you have to adjust to a different shot speed. Even if you're stepping down a level, you now have to adjust to a different shot speed. You're used to blocking 80-mile-an-hour shots, and now you're taking 70-mile-an-hour shots. So everything's a little bit off. So when you're talking about just playing 2 games in a different league, I feel like there is definitely an element of that where maybe he just didn't adjust. Maybe it was just 2 bad games, but I'm not overly concerned about it.
Okay, so, but then going back to that point, my concern with that is definitely not that important when you look at his VHL numbers from last year. He had 18 games played and 920 save percentage. The thing that jumps out to me from the last year, though, is in the U20s, the World Juniors. He played 5 games and only had an 877.
Yeah, he had a brutal World Juniors that year.
Yeah, so that is the most concerning stat to me this year, or like looking at this. But I think that he's ready to rebound in this year's World Juniors if they actually do, play them.
He did that as an underager. It was his first major international tournament, and since then internationally he has been elite. So it is a little bit of a cause for concern, but he's more than made up for it in my mind. So I'm not too worried about it. Yeah. But like it goes back to that same thing. Like goalies are always going to at least be a little bit inconsistent.
Yep. And those are absolutely, and especially young goaltenders. That's why you don't see goalies that are taking the top 5 make the jump to the NHL like right away or even a year or two after. They take time to develop.
I will say though, Askarov, I think might play a game in the NHL before his 20th birthday. I don't think he's a full-time starter. I don't think any of that, but I think there's a good chance Askarov plays in the NHL, like in his D+2 year. So, like as a 19-year-old, I think he has a shot to play a couple games.
Ooh, I would say his 20-year-old season. I mean, I think if we're comparing like the next quote-unquote prodigy goaltenders, you kind of have to take a look at Carter Hart in that situation. And Carter Hart didn't become a full-time goalie until I think his 21-year-old season. I think that's how old he is. I could be wrong. But he definitely got some games in his 20-year-old season. Yeah. So I think that'd be a good comparison for Askarov. I wouldn't see him obviously taking the jump from the KHL to the NHL this next season.
No.
But the very tail end of the following season or the very beginning of the 2022 season. I'm kind of losing track of years at this point, but
it's weird with the COVID break because we're so deep in that this is still the 2020-21 season, right? But yeah, I know what you mean. And I agree with you for the most part. I'm just saying that I think that he could, if he wanted to, he could probably play as an AHL backup, maybe a fringe start in the AHL today. I think that he has a chance in his D+2 year to maybe get in like that mix of, both our starting goalies are hurt. Let's see what Askarov looks like in one game of NHL action. Just depends on the team, depends on the situation. But I do think there's an outside shot of that happening.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really think we should take too much time talking about Askarov because realistically he's not going to be there, probably even past 10.
So. He is very interesting. But if you do want to see more talking about him, I did drop my betting on the NHL draft little YouTube video today, so I'll have that linked in the description for anyone who's not watching this live, and you can get a little more Askarov talk because we're going to talk a lot about some skaters that I like.
Yeah, absolutely. So who do we want to jump into first here?
Let's
NCAA guy?
Yeah, let's get the American. Like, I guess he's not American, but he's playing in the NCAA in America. So let's talk about him and then Brisson. Let's start with Holloway. I like him. I think this is, I feel like maybe the safest pick of the guys that we'll be talking about. He really slots in as a pretty surefire guy to at least make an NHL roster. I do think he's probably a middle sixer with maybe a little bit of upside.
Yeah, I like Dylan Holloway a lot. He's probably second or third on my list right now. And touching back on the point, going from the AJ to the NCAA, that's a big jump. And he performed. So this is a guy that I'm looking at really hard if he's there at 25. So hopefully.
Yeah, Billy, like you said, he's, in my eyes, he's probably the safest pick. We know a lot more, how the translation works from the NCAA to the NHL than like the Euro leagues to the NHL. Especially Zach, you make a good point. Like he jumped from the AJ and then still put up some pretty solid numbers, albeit on a very, very talented Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. This Wisconsin team is loaded with talent, all over the place. But I do think he's the safest pick. The rankings that I saw had him ranked anywhere from 14 to 26. So, probably at the tail end of the Avs range. I do see him going late teens, early 20s. But if he's there, he's a guy that the Avs are definitely going to consider. Definitely just a guy that is not going to really stick out too much if you're like watching him, play. But he's just always kind of in the right spot. A really solid two-way guy, and just can produce really solidly. So,
yeah, the reason I see him going, honestly, early teens is because he's a center and he's already like big NHL size. Yeah. Like, not that really matters because he's not going to play, but he's already 230 or 203. Sorry, 230 would be huge.
You already know he's going to be.
Yeah, this guy, he's pretty much a man already. So we'll see. I think this guy goes pretty early. I don't think he's going to be in our range at all.
I think there's a chance he slides, but we're gonna have to see how the board breaks because, like you said, he is a center. Mm-hmm. And if a team thinks, you know what, we've got our third line center that we can lock up for 7 years, they're gonna be all over that. So it depends on what other teams think. I think there's a chance he falls, but I think you're probably right. I think that this is a guy that likely does go before we're up.
Mm-hmm. I will say though, Zach, with your comment, like we're not about like how we might not see him, pretty recently. I do think that he could end up playing some NHL games at the end of the Wisconsin season, kind of depending on how things fold out. I do think that he has some, he's as pro ready, I guess, as any of the other players that will be.
I would agree.
I would agree. He would, but not in Colorado. I think if he went to a New Jersey, maybe. Yeah. I would say probably not in Colorado.
That's fair. Yeah, that's definitely fair. I just do think that he is the most pro ready out of any of the players.
Of the ones we're talking about today, I agree completely. Easily the most pro ready.
Mm-hmm.
And let's move into a guy who I don't think is nearly as pro ready. I think this guy might be at least a 2, probably a 3-year development plan, and that's Brendan Brisson. But I do like his upside as well as his floor. I feel like he's got a fairly good mix. He's a guy that I think he could play really anywhere in your top 9. I don't really envision him as a fourth liner, but I wouldn't be shocked to see him do it depending on the team. But I think he slots in very well in that middle 6 role. He could be a great playmaker or like really a shooter on your second line with that elite one-timer, or really play the same role on the third line. So I like Brisson a lot. I think that he is also another relatively safe pick. Not quite as safe as Holloway, but he's a safe pick that also has a little bit more upside, I think, than Holloway.
Yeah. This guy's a little bit lower on my list. You touched on it, Billy. This guy has an unreal one-timer, but he's a little bit, in my opinion, of a playoff specialist. So that his 5-on-5 shots, from what I was reading, are not, he doesn't create opportunity.
He's definitely a lot better on the power play.
Yeah, for sure. I also read his defense is lacking, but that's still, like I mentioned on the last podcast, not too big of a deal to me with the young players. That can be taught. But this guy, I don't really agree with, like, he has a high ceiling, but I do agree with his floor. I think he could be an NHL player for sure. He's probably not NHL ready this year, as you said. 2 years kind of deal with this guy, but he's lower on my list for sure.
Okay. Not a huge fan of him. I will say
No.
I don't think that I would draft him just because he fits a mold as really, like, you touched on him being kind of a power play specialist. He fits that mold really well. There are just a lot of options in this range that fit that mold pretty well, and I think there are a couple others that I like better, including a Swedish kid that we're going to get to a little bit later.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm a lot higher on Brisson than you guys. I think he makes really solid decisions, and I do think that his skill set stands out a lot more than some of the other guys we'll be talking about. I think he has a solid pair of hands. And, going back to even his prep days when he was at Shattuck, like, he was putting up some insane numbers that would, rival any of the players that had played in at that program in the NHL, today, like the Crosbys and McKinnons. Not quite that level, but it is up there. And then he transitioned really well into USHL. The USHL is pretty notorious for being a low-scoring league, and he put up well above a point per game. like you said, he is probably like a bit of a power play specialist, but just watching some of his tape, I do think that kind of level that he's at right now can, like he'll get out of that. And I think going to the University of Michigan next year is going to help him a lot with that, because I would be pretty hard pressed to see him, going on that PP1 right away at Michigan.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he probably, by the time he will be on that PP1 eventually at Michigan, hard to see him doing it as a freshman. He's not exactly, Newhook instantly became, I mean, not even instantly. He took a little while to move up into one of the top players at BC, and he was a fairly high end prospect, especially towards the end of the year. Prospects that you get in the late first round when they go into the NCAA typically aren't the best players on their NCAA teams right away. They'll typically get there, but he's gonna have to work his way up that lineup for sure.
Yeah, I also think it's kind of worth mentioning he played on the Chicago Steel, one of the best teams in the USHL last year. And if I'm not mistaken, Michigan is going to be pretty stacked. So he's not going to get that power play time like you're saying. So I would really love to see him this year start creating more opportunities for himself. He's not going to get set up nearly as much or be able to have the time, on an island to take a 1T in the NCAA anymore. So hopefully he can get that going. I don't hate him at all. I think he's going to be an NHL player, but he's just not high end.
It's worth noting that he's probably playing in the weakest league as well of all the prospects we've talked about, or that we're going to talk about. The USHL, not on the same level as the CHL major junior leagues, or definitely not on the same level as a lot of these pro leagues.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But the USHL is definitely a lot lower scoring of a league than the CHL. Sure.
Yeah, it's tougher to score goals, so it's impressive that he put up the stats that he did. I like the kid. I can't wait to see. This is a guy I'm gonna keep my eye on for sure, whether the Avs draft him or not. But I think that depending on what else is on the board, I think I'd probably end up going with some other options. He's not necessarily at the top of my list. And let's move on to the Swedes, because I cannot wait to talk about Noel Gunler, because this is the guy I've been saying for a while There are two guys that we're going to talk about today that are my one and my two of the guys that I want the Avs to draft. Noel Gunler is one of those two guys. They're kind of interchangeable for me, but this man has a cannon. There are some effort concerns with him, but those are some things that can be worked out, especially with his fellow countryman Gabe Landeskog pushing him a little bit, Nathan McKinnon pushing him a little bit. But I love the big Swede with the rocket, and I think that he's a great fit in Colorado. He could fill in, that we talk about bringing in Taylor Hall to be that top six forward, the one that the Avs are kind of missing. We have 5 clear top 6 forwards. Newhook will be the 5th to replace Kadri. I feel like if the Avs do sign Taylor Hall, as soon as that contract is up, Noel Gunler slides nicely right back in there to fill out that top 6.
Yeah. Yeah, I like Gunler a lot. I just don't really see his upside the same way that you guys do. I guess I'm a little bit lower on him than you guys might be, just like hearing about it. But I do think that he does create like a good amount of space, especially just to open up for his shot, because he does have a really nice shot. I just don't really see the explosiveness, and I guess you're not going to really get those explosive players at this stage of the draft. But I'm just kind of looking for guys at this point that are just going to like at least take me out of my seat a little bit, if that's like makes sense.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple guys like that in this draft, and especially in where we're picking. Gunler's not that type of guy, like you said. To me, you already touched on it. His shot is unreal. To me, he's just like a little bit more of a, I guess I'm going to compare him to Gabe here, but a more skilled Gabe Landeskog. He's already big. He's 6'2". This is another guy that's going to end up being 220. Noel, I don't know what else to say about this guy other than his shooting and his skating is really well.
Yeah, he's kind of he's not exactly versatile. He does what he does really well,
Yeah.
and he has those NHL skills that would play today, but he doesn't have. He's got a lot of room to grow, and I think that's some of the things that you're touching on, Marshall, are things that you would hope that he develops, and that is what would make him into a very, very high end NHL player.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like going back into it, the last couple of guys that we've talked about are right in the Avs range. Brisson was 15, anywhere from 15 to 41, and Gunler's 18 to 62. I was kind of surprised to see him ranked as low as 62. I don't see him dropping all the way to 62.
Drop.
But these are two guys to definitely keep an eye on because it's very realistic that they're there when the Avs are picking. And maybe it's just like me, I can't really evaluate these guys playing in Europe as much as you can in like the CHL and stuff. But I do like the prospect, and like you said, Billy, he does need some work, but there's more enticing guys to me. I'll say that.
Okay, yeah, he's definitely. I think he's probably a few years away, even another 2 to 3 year project, maybe even a 4 year project, especially as we've seen the Avs take it very slow with a lot of their prospects. So I don't think that we'd see him right away. Like I said, I think if you can get Taylor Hall on a 3 year deal and then let Gunler slide in right after, I think that would work out very nicely. But he is probably my favorite prospect in that I am confident will be there. So there are other prospects I like that could fall to the Avs. Gunler is my favorite prospect that I am confident will still be there at 25.
That's fair. I would say that he's my second, and we'll get into the other guy. That like I know that this guy will probably be there, but that's fair, Billy. That's why I had to bring up the options of like just showing that Brisson and Gunler are probably going to be there when the Avs are picking.
I like it. All right, let's talk about the other Swede. And Marshall and I, we talked a little bit about this off the air. Neither of us are exactly a fan. If I'm being completely honest, I wouldn't even take him in the second round. But he is right in Colorado's range, so we're going to talk a little bit about Zion Nybeck. He's just kind of blah to me. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is a guy that I really couldn't find as much as I wanted to on because he's kind of blah, just like you said. I don't really got much to say about him. I really don't. Yeah. This is not really a guy that I'm looking at the Avs to take,
I don't feel
honestly.
like he has a high floor or a high ceiling.
No.
Yeah. I see this guy as being like, honestly, like a fourth line fringe guy. He is out of the guys that we're going to be talking about today, he is the lowest on my list. For his size, he's a smaller guy. You'd love those smaller guys to have like a bunch of quickness. That's kind of where the NHL is transitioning to a little bit. And out of Nybeck's game, I just don't really see that. With his quickness, sure he can like display some like signs of him like being a decent skater, but in terms of like the Cole Caulfield and DeBrincat and Gani Goudreau types, I just don't see that out of Zybeck as a
I think he's
a
good
guy.
Skater. I don't think he's a good enough skater to account for being a little guy. If you are a little guy, you have to be a truly elite skater to really make it as a good player in the NHL. He could make it in the fringes, a Rico Grimaldi type, but I don't think that he's worth a pick this high. There are scouts that love him. I don't know if there are any scouts that love him, but there are scouts that are high enough on him to project him into the first round. So we will see. I think that there's a good chance that he does fall on draft day because I just think that there's just not enough there, really, to convince anyone. I feel like go anywhere in the top 50, I feel like you're just going to have a better option.
Yeah, Billy. Like you said, I do want to clarify. It's like I do think that he's like a solid skater, but definitely not a solid enough skater to amount for his 5'8" stature.
Yeah,
so
exactly. So that's probably enough of the guy we don't like. Let's get more into the guys that we do like. We've got the Germans and the Russian left. Who do you want to talk about first?
I want to talk
Me
about the
too,
Russian,
because
honestly,
that's my favorite prospect.
Yeah,
Rodion
me too.
Amirov is elite across the board in every trait he has. The only question is the consistency. It's can he put it all together? It's also can he translate it to American ice? I don't know. And there's always the Russian factor of maybe there's a chance he doesn't come over. There's been no signs of him saying anything about it or hearing about Amirov not wanting to come over, so that's not much of a risk factor, but he is, if we're talking about high-end talent, of the guys we've talked about in each episode, the only guy that is better than Amirov is Hendrix Lapierre.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one of those other 2-year projects to me. And you look at him, you see he's 168, and one thing comes to mind: Elias Pettersson.
I like it.
One thing comes to mind, and that's what it is. And this is a guy that I think he play that type of game, and it excites me being in the Avs range. This guy's exciting to me.
Yeah, he sees the ice very, very well. I will say that out of these guys on this list, I do think that he is outside of Askarov. I don't think that he's going to be there for the Avs. He's pretty consistently ranked mid first rounder. The worst ranking that he got was 25th, so the Avs would have to be praying at that point. But yeah, he's one of my favorite guys for sure. Very skilled, very, very skilled. Not the biggest guy, like you said, Zach. But if you want to watch some high-level hockey, just go and watch some of his shootout moves because they're pretty sweet.
I think you touched on it. I like that you talked about it because he is a guy that is likely gone when the Avs pick. I'd give him about a 25% chance to fall to the Avs. You do hope that teams are scared of that Russian factor enough. Russians do tend to fall a little bit more than other players. So that's kind of the hope, but even then, with a kid with this much high-end talent, it is likely that he could go as high as 15. He likely goes in the late teens, maybe the early 20s. He is a guy I'd consider trading up for. The Avs don't exactly have a ton of ammo to be trading up. It would probably involve either next year's first-round pick or next year's second and this year's third, depending on how far up we're trying to move. But if he does get into those 20s, I'd be working the phones a little bit.
Yeah, this guy is a stud. I definitely like him, but like I said, I just don't really see him being there at 25. But I would see Sakic kind of making a play to move up. And with the Russian factor, the Avs have a pretty good relationship with Russians, so that shouldn't really scare them away. Certain franchises definitely do not have a good relationship with the Russians, though.
Yeah, there are a few that would definitely be scared off. And luckily, there are a few in the range right before the Avs in the 20s that I like. Like New Jersey has 2 picks in that range, and they have the whole Kovalchuk nightmare. So there's a couple teams in the range right before the Avs that could cause him to drop because they're not exactly on the right page with Russian. Yeah, there you go. So
although Calgary's a bit higher, but
you can hope a little bit on him. But I do hope he's there.
Yeah.
I don't think that he's there. Let's talk about the Germans because I think these are the two that almost perfectly fit the Avs range. I think both of these guys will go between 20 and 30.
Yeah, I could see Reichel falling out a little bit.
I would honestly expect Reichel to go earlier. Like, I wouldn't be shocked to see Peterka to go first, but I do expect Reichel to go earlier.
I think from an outsider's perspective, a lot of people like Reichel a lot better just because he's a little bit more of a flashy player. But JJ Peterka, he shows unbelievable work ethic. You will never have to worry about putting him on the ice and going balls out to try to get that puck away from the other team. And that's one thing I love about Peterka. He has decent skill, but he's always willing to win that puck battle, like you, Billy.
He's like a little he's a grinder in the corners. And he's 5'11", but he's a fairly big 5'11". He's pretty stocky. And he is powerful on his skates. He's not necessarily a burner, but he's very powerful. You're not going to knock him over very easily, and he likes to win those corner battles.
he's a guy to me. Like, I feel like he's a pretty safe pick. I do think that he's going to be an NHLer one day for sure. But he's just one of those guys that nothing really stands out to me about him, but other than his work ethic, but everything is just kind of there. Like, there's nothing that's super, super lacking. Just no high end things.
I like that idea. Like, there's nothing elite about JJ Peterka. He's very good all around. He's solid in his own zone. He's solid making the right plays. He's got a good hockey IQ. He's, like we said, he's a grinder. There is no there's no like elite shot like Noel Gunler has. There's no like elite speed like you'll see out of some of these guys. But he's got a lot of it all around. I do think he's a fairly safe guy that you expect to at least play on your third line with a little bit of upside. This guy's never going to be a point per game player in the NHL. That would shock me quite a bit. But I do see a world where he works his way into a top 6.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. I kind of liken him to a little bit of a smaller Kevin Hayes.
Yeah.
Just kind of always doing the right thing. Decent skater. And just is willing to do whatever to help the team win.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I would be very happy with Peterka. I mean, unless Amarov is on the board, then I would want Amarov, but I would not. There's not a lot of scenarios where I'd be like, oh, they took Peterka and I'm disappointed. I like that pick a lot. I think that this is a good guy that especially we talk about the Avs in their next window in 3 years when these guys are going to be in their everyday lineup. They'll need those ELCs in their bottom 6, and I think Peterka is a great guy that you can be confident that you can have a bottom 6 player, probably a third line player, that you're paying less than $1 million.
Yeah. Solid prospect. I do like both of these Germans, and the Germans have a pretty solid pool of players this season.
3 first-rounders out of the DEL. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Like, Stützle's most likely going top 5 if...
Yeah, he's probably the favorite to go to at this point, and would be the highest drafted German player ever.
Wait, Draisaitl was drafted 4th.
Third.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would beat out Draisaitl, which is super impressive. And like he is that good. So the DEL is on its way. That is the one concern though, is that they do play in the DEL. And you're not necessarily 100% sold on it as a development league yet. You do have the success story with Draisaitl. Mo Seider looks like he'll be another success story for Detroit. Even he seemed like a reach at the time, but right now he looks like a steal.
Yeah, he's looking very solid. I mean, dude, I know Billy, you and I were very happy when Detroit picked Seider.
Less happy about it now.
I'm pretty happy with both Byram and Newhook.
Yeah,
so
it worked out for us. Yeah, that's true. It did start pushing guys down, and we needed that center. Newhook is such an underrated value. But let's stay focused here and let's talk about our last prospect of the day, and that is Reichel. Lucas Reichel is a little bit flashier than Peterka, but still a guy that you were pretty confident could play in the NHL. He has a fairly high floor, and I like him to move up and down the lineup. I think that this is... I mentioned him in a role similar to Vladislav Nemesnikov to Marshall earlier. I don't necessarily think that that's a perfect play style comparison, but I think it is a team fit comparison where he's a guy that you're very confident in putting in your third line. You know, if you've got an injury in your top 6, you're confident putting him on your second line, and you don't feel too bad about putting him in your first line. He's not going to hurt you there much. So I think he's a guy that you can move up and down the lineup. You feel like he's got a pretty high floor, and he's got a reasonably good ceiling too. I think he could become an everyday top 6er if he does hit his ceiling.
Yeah, I agree. I think Reichel's a little bit of a sleeper in this draft. I like him more than Peterka. Is that how you say it? Peterka. I like him a little bit better than Peterka because he has the same kind of skill, and then he does have that little bit of flashiness to him. Like he has. I would say he has better hands for sure.
Yeah. I had mentioned this to Billy earlier. Definitely not the same type of prospect, but stylistically, I do think that he looks a little bit like a Capo Cacao. Probably not the same size. I mean, actually, pretty close to the same size. And another guy with a good motor. You're not going to really see him, sleeping on pucks out there or not making the right plays. I do like him better than Peterka as well. He might be my favorite prospect out of these guys that we just kind of talked about. But he is maybe the guy outside of Nybeck that I would see him being there, just based off of the rankings that all the scouts were giving him. He was ranked anywhere from 31st to 43rd. So some would even consider it a bit of a reach, but not in my eyes.
I think that I think he's a guy that has climbed a little bit right as we've approached the draft. So far that, like, he's probably going to go ahead of that ranking. Like, I'll be surprised if he makes it to 31, even though, like, that's where a lot of the scouts have him, but he seems to have been a late riser. So I do think that he probably goes in the 20s. I'd be very surprised to see him in the teens, but I also think that he probably goes before that 31 mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a guy that is not going to come into the NHL next year, probably even the year after. I think he definitely needs some development, and I would like to see these Germans go from the DEL to even like a Q. A lot of these Europeans actually go to like a Q or one of the other Euro leagues, either to get adjusted to the North American style of play or higher competition.
Yeah, I think both of them are good import candidates. I will say, we keep talking about like their timelines. Really, taking 2 to 3 years is not a knock. At this point in the draft, if you have a player that's not taking 2 to 3 years, they took some crazy step in their development after you drafted them, because guys that are a year away are usually going in the top 10.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I love the Euros just as a whole. Any guy that we talked about today, aside from Nybeck, is a guy that I would be more than happy with if the Avs came out with him as the... Really, I think they'd slot in as after Kaut graduates and Byram hopefully graduates, the second best prospect in our system behind Newhook. I am really excited to see like who the Avs get. If maybe they trade down, maybe they trade the pick altogether for a player. But I love a lot of these prospects. Is there any other things you guys want to mention before we go ahead and get out of here for today?
Yeah, I do. What?
Connor McDavid has tested positive for COVID.
At least it's in the off season.
True. I do have a question for you guys, though, real quick. All right, I'm taking away players that I think are going to be, picked before us. So, minus Holloway, Askarov, and Amarov, what player would you want most?
Out of those three?
Minus those guys. Reichel, Gunler. I'm kind of... I think I want Gunler more than Reichel as well. I think he's the best, most well-rounded player in the draft.
I like Reichel the most, personally.
I like the rocket out of Gunler, and I think it's a good fit because, the Avs need to step up on that power play, and if they could get a cannon like Gunler, that would be nice.
Mm-hmm. It would.
All right, well...
But I just like skilled guys.
All right. Thank you to all our viewers for listening. We're going to go ahead and pop off. One more day. We're less than 24 hours from the draft. It's really exciting. This is my favorite time of year other than the Stanley Cup playoffs. It's exciting to look at the future, look at who could be wearing an Avs sweater before too long. So I'm excited. I think the rest of you guys are excited as well. If you're still in that live chat, go ahead, hit the like button for us. Help us grow this channel a little bit. Subscribe if you have not already. And we will see you after the draft.